it almost just feels like he's conditioning, and it's going to be that way for 8 weeks. And when they get to late November, December, when they're gearing up to win the Super Bowl, he's going to be fine all of a sudden. Hello, sir.
What's going on, buddy? How are you?
Oh, it's later in the day for me. It's an hour in the future, so I do have a bit more information than you do. I mean, it's not your fault that I live in the future, but that's where I'm at right now.
Do you watch the challenge an hour before me, or does it come on at the same time?
Yeah, what does it come on? 8 o'clock your time?
8 o'clock my time, yeah.
Yeah, it comes on at 9 for me.
Okay. I got you.
So you complain about these Monday night games and these Thursday night games and these Sunday night games. Think about me.
Yeah, that is rough. That is pretty rough. So you're going to bed like often, especially those games where like like we had on Monday night with the Falcons Eagles, where like after the game's over, your adrenaline's just kind of going and you can't just fall asleep right away. Like that's part of the East Coast dad problem too, that I feel like goes overlooked a little bit. But do you get that feeling at night, like whatever, like after a game like that, where it's crazy, insane things are happening, maybe you have some money on the line and things either go or don't go your way, but it came down to the wire. Are you then wired before you go to bed?
100%. So for the first week, let's say the first 6 weeks of football, I will stay up. I'll watch every single primetime game. But then midway through the season, reality hits me where I checked the calendar the other day, JJ. I'm old now.
Yeah.
And it's not great. And I got 2 little kids, so I'm up at 6 a.m. every morning anyway.
Yeah.
So I usually just kind of watch. I bet on the first touchdown. I watch till the first touchdown or like the halfway through the first quarter, hit record, go to bed, and I wake up an hour before them and just get everything done. So usually I don't stay up for the end of the games because it ends at like 1 o'clock my time. It's too early when you're getting up at 6 every morning.
Yeah, it's tough because like I said, this is the East Coast dad's problem. No matter what time you go to bed, this is why, in my opinion, like some people end up drinking more in their 30s and 40s after they have kids, but also some people end up not doing that because it is impossible to be hungover and parent. It is a very, very difficult task.
I mean, it not only is it difficult to wake up hungover and parent, it's also difficult to wake up and be on camera for 4 hours a day. You don't look so great when you got all the booze sucking up everything in your system.
I remember one of the first experiences I had of being under lights, like with the studio or whatnot, was in New York with you at one of the FSTAs. And it was probably like 2015. It was a really long time. It was like a lifetime ago. And, we were talking Bachelor, I think at the time. And all that. But I remember just being, because I sweat a lot too. And I remember just being drenched in sweat while doing that. And people who are actually on, like I got lights around here and stuff, but it's not the same as like studio lights. And studio lights is like next level stuff. People don't realize how hot you get in those things.
It's better now because most studio lights have switched over to being LED lights. But even 10 years ago, some were LED, but a lot of places are just so cheap, especially the place that I was working for the time was so cheap that they were using lights from like 10 years before that when they didn't have LEDs. So you got, like we used to sit in our old studio, the giant studio, and everyone would have to change their shirt afterwards because everyone was just dripping with sweat. Now it's not so bad. Like the lights I have here are fine. The lights in my big studio are still all LED. We started running the air conditioner while it was going, but then you could hear the air conditioner, so that was no good.
Yeah, that's the problem with me right now is I have a fan here that I would love to turn on right now, but I don't know if I can because sometimes it picks up and stuff like that, and I just don't want to deal with that from like an audio perspective. This is the studio in your home problems that I run into.
You don't normally go live though, do you?
No, I go live. Well, in season, not as much. Out of season, I was doing a lot of like best ball drafts and stuff.
So if you go live, obviously there's no way to get rid of that, but especially for the audio, which I assume you would release afterwards anyway, what you do is you throw it into Adobe Audition, you find your little noise print of quiet where you can only hear the buzz, you slap on the capture noise print, adaptive noise reduction, boom, 1 minute later, all that sound is gone for your entire file.
Look at this pro. Hey, one question I wanted to ask you before we like get into like real stuff. I was thinking about this. So people don't know that you and I are big challenge nerds, the show on MTV. People probably don't even know what the challenge is as I'm saying that. But you and I have been watching it for I got into it in like middle school, like when it first started. Like I've been watching since the beginning, as you have too. I have a question. I was thinking about this with you coming on. We both love the challenge. Which position in football would perform best on the challenge?
Well, we saw a few guys from the NFL do that champs versus pros, probably like a safety.
That's what I thought too. You want to know why I thought safety instead of corner too? Not just because they're a little bit thicker and stuff, but they could like crush in like a hall brawl or something like that. But also, they don't have the egos that a cornerback does. They don't have the egos that a wide receiver. Like we saw T.O. on the one season, and he was he was a mess. You can't have that kind of ego going into one of these things. I feel like safeties are more like a Jordan type from an attitude perspective, where they're just kind of confident. There's a little cockiness there, but that can go a really long way in that kind of game.
Did you watch any of the Challenge USAs?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, Danny McRae was a safety for the Cowboys.
That's right. Yeah, he might have been either that,
and he was maybe, like older and thicker at the time too. Like I'm thinking like in your prime safeties where you want to be.
Because 90s, the safeties in the 90s are like linebackers now, maybe even like DNs now, right? Like everyone was just massive back then. But he, or maybe early 2000s whenever he played. But yeah, he was great. He's been a great challenger.
I just look at Theo. Like Theo's 6'5". He's obviously put on muscle since he stopped being a sprinter, but he almost he ran in the Commonwealth Games. He almost got to the Olympics for Britain. And like he's easily the most physically dominant person, more so than CT. Yeah. Who's, I don't want to spoil it.
No spoilers. No spoilers. Yes, no spoilers.
But like just even to see CT, who was always sort of the presence, or Fessy, who played, I think he was like an All-American D2 tight end at Tennessee Chattanooga.
Yeah.
But Theo is just a different level of athlete for these guys. And he's so big. Like, could you just imagine an NFL actual talent safety, 6'2", 220? Like, the guy's going to dominate.
Yeah, Theo's like a LeBron type, right? Like that stature compared to the rest of the challengers as LeBron is compared to, the rest of the NBA. I thought that I'd throw that out there. I'm glad that you said safety, though, because that was the position that I thought of. If anyone hasn't checked out the challenge, check it out. There's a lot of history at this point. They're in season 40. So it's a little bit tougher to probably like catch up on but this would probably be the season to do it, because they're like replaying some of the things that happened historically. And there's a lot of that going on because they brought up so many OGs in this season.
I'm very much enjoying this season.
Yeah, it's been good. It's been really good.
I like that you get triggered every time it's not like the fairest elimination ever. Cracks me up.
I know.
It's a game show.
I know. I text Pat after every episode and just give him my very brief, like 2 or 3 sentence synopsis of basically the elimination at the end of the day. And I get irritated whenever they're like carnival games and they're not like, we watch the challenge to see people beat each other up.
But we don't, though. Like, think about like the golden age of the challenge. There was no beating up. It was all carnival games.
I know, but then as things evolve, you have higher expectations. Anyway, people don't care about the challenge. Let's talk about fantasy football. We're 2 weeks into the season now. Okay, there's a lot of reacting going on. Some would say overreacting by fantasy managers. My question to you is, do you think that we should be more or less nervous or start to panic about some of these underperformers? I know that you can probably say take a case by case, but are you someone as a manager, as an analyst, are you someone who gives players a little bit more time, or are you reactionary because it's important to be reactionary because this is the first time we're actually seeing these guys, in game action, especially now that the preseason isn't really a thing anymore?
So you mentioned case by case, but yes, that's going to be, my opinion on one guy who's an underperformer might be like my opinion on Amari Cooper versus Zamir White might be completely different in how I see those guys rebounding. But I think a lot of it has to do with what type of player you are as well, and the type of league that you play in. Like, do you play in a very active trading league? If so, well, then there could be the reverse on it. Because I play in one league that I played in forever. It's super active in trading. Or it was. No one will trade with me anymore after 19 years.
Been there.
Not just because I do this, because it's no one wants. Listen, everyone always overvalues everyone who's on their team. Yeah. So when we talk about buy low, so Jamar Chase was a very good example this week. Like, buy low on Jamar Chase. Like, yeah, that's exactly what the guy who is Jamar Chase wants to do. Sell him for 60 cents on the dollar right now. Like, that's not happening. We're still at the point of the season where if you drafted someone pretty highly in a draft, the owner of that player is going to hold on to them for 125 cents on the dollar because they don't want to look stupid for trading a superstar or admitting they made a mistake. That's just human nature, and that's how it works in fantasy leagues. However, if you can find one of these underperformers, so there's two ways you can do this. You can find the underperformers and just constantly trade your kind of out of nowhere guys that you don't necessarily believe in but are running hot right now, and go get the just volume-based guys, or guys that maybe like someone like Amari Cooper. Like, does Deshaun get better?
Chris Olave. Yeah,
Chris Olave would be another one. Not like the top top tier guys, but the next level down and the next level down. If you just traded for one of those guys per week, your team by the end of the year would be awesome.
Yeah.
And you would have flipped all these waiver wire dudes that you ended up picking up or guys that you didn't believe in or late round picks, and you've maximized all the value for them. The other way that you can go about this is find the overachiever right now, like someone like J.K. Dobbins.
Right.
For example, there is a chance he's like a top 10 running back this year.
Yeah.
I don't like that's not where I'm projecting him.
Sure.
That's well within the range of outcomes and actual probability with the schedule they play, the role that he's taken on, how good this offensive line looks for the Chargers. Just if your line's going to be bad for 25 years, I guess everyone's assume it's going to be bad going forward. It's not. It's great. And if they're consistently rushing and being either in close games or slightly up in games, he could just backdoor his way, even splitting snaps with Gus Edwards, as long as he's getting the more valuable snaps, which he is right now. That would be the type of player that I would almost buy high on. Some people buy high by, doing something at their house, walking to the corner store and buying some chips or Dunkaroos. I go and look at a J.K. Dobbins and say, hey, I can give up like middling player on my team that I don't even really want and trade for this guy who might actually be really good because it feels like the other guy, the other owner in your league is selling high on J.K. Dobbins. Yeah. But he's not. He's actually selling low because you've projected where he's actually going to be and it's sustaining where he's at right now.
Yeah, so I do my 15 transactions episode every week where I have buy and sell recommendations and add and drop recommendations, all that kind of stuff. And by far the hardest thing is to give that adjective to a player because I'm doing it. Number one, I'm writing that column and producing the podcast on a Monday before I have any idea what the real sentiment is about a certain player, right? So it's very difficult, number one, to like know which direction someone or a group of people are feeling about a player. So it really comes down to, hey, this guy's playing, J.K. Dobbins playing way over his head right now. My recommendation is I don't know where people are necessarily at with Dobbins in terms of, like his actual value or how they're valuing him. If they're seeing him, I got him in the 12th round and now all of a sudden he's been this RB1 for me. I think that a logical fantasy manager would probably sit back and be like, okay, he's playing a little bit over his head right now, right? Like he's playing like 11, 12 PPR points per game above expectation. Maybe he's going to play a little bit above expectation because of the scheme and who he is, and he's been an efficient back, but we know that he's not going to maintain this. So I can sit there and say, yeah, he's a sell candidate, but only if you're really going to profit on this guy, right? Like that's the thing. And that's what I said on the show this week. I'm like he's a hypothetical sell candidate, but at the same time, you got to make sure that you're really getting something for, and I've seen a lot, like oftentimes I'll come out with a buy and sell recommendation and then people hit me up and they're like, hey, I sold J.K. Dobbins for, some very mediocre.
Brendan Cooks.
Yeah, right.
Oh, right. Great. Nice trade, man.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And I'm like, that's not the point. The point is that if the sentiment in your league with that in particular league manager is at a certain level, then you gauge based on that. Like it's not as simple as like, here's a list, go buy and sell based off of this list because every person in your league is going to value these guys differently.
And that's the perfect level of player to do it with, where no one values him highly, but he might actually be valuable. And nothing makes a fantasy owner feel better than feeling like they sold high on a guy that they don't project to be as good. Because you don't need him to be as good as he is right now. Even if he's, 80%, 75% of what he is. He's a low-end running back too, flex play. You're telling me you can't use a running back who's the 21st ranked running back every week?
Yeah, well, that's the thing though too, is that I try to like earlier this week I put out a poll for this entirely this reason and this player, right? It's because of J.K. Dobbins, where I was like, I don't know how people are viewing him, and I put out a poll that said Jahmyr Gibbs or J.K. Dobbins, rest of season PPR, full PPR league.
So 99% Jahmyr Gibbs.
Well, you would hope as much. It was 80-20 was the split, okay? And so my point was, if you have a 20 in your league, like start to approach it from that perspective, right? But I think that we do have to give, and I tried to do this as best to my ability, while also understanding the audience that we're speaking to are not always playing in uber competitive leagues with like people that are even remotely logical about fantasy football, because it's just people are playing in office leagues and people, right? So like there's this balance of, yeah, like Jamar Chase is a buy, like technically he is a buy, but anyone that's looking at this stuff knows that he's elite and they get Washington this week, right? So there's like reasons as to why like you got to do it right now if you're going to do it at all. But also the person who has Jamar Chase probably isn't just going to, like, I've thrown some trades out to Jamar Chase managers this week and they're getting back to me and saying, I'm not giving up Jamar Chase right now. And it's like, okay, that's a very, very logical stance. It frustrates me, but it's very logical.
But you could also kind of play the other way around. So Jamar Chase has this great matchup on Monday night against Washington. We think he should smash in that spot. It looks like T. Higgins could play this week. At least I think that they want him to play this week. He's returned to practice on a limited basis. We'll see how he's doing. But if Jamar Chase goes out and has the big Jamar Chase game, the 11 catch, 160-yard, 2-touchdown game, the Jamar Chase owner in your league is never going to trade Jamar Chase after that. When in fact that would be his peak value for the year if that actually happened.
Right.
Because he's someone that people were already interested in because they're like, oh, he's a buy low because we know that he's great. And then he goes out and is great in a primetime spot, which most people do watch. That does have an effect on the psychology of how your fantasy league works. That if you did own Jamar Chase, waited to Monday, and he goes off, if you were looking for 125 cents on the dollar anyway as a buy low, and some people were kicking the tires and said, nah, I don't want to do that, you're probably going to get 200 cents on the dollar. The problem is after they have the good game, no one ever wants to trade them when that's actually the best time to use them as trade pieces.
Right. It's hard to do that though. Like we've all been in that position where we have that guy. Like if you have Marvin Harrison Jr. right now after what he did in week 2, you're not trying to do that. Like when you have these players or Malik Neighbors, you have these players who are doing these monster things, these crazy things. You don't want to give them up. I understand that part of the psychology to it too. So, but yeah,
like if Chase goes off on Monday night, find the Christian McCaffrey owner in your league, get McCaffrey and someone else who's awesome, and they will take it.
There you go. All right. So we're talking about the Bengals a little bit here. They've been a little bit of a disappointment to start the year. What other offenses that have sort of gotten off to a slow start, which is many of them, because it's been very, very bad offensively to start this NFL season. But which offenses do you think could really turn things around?
I think the Bills offense.
Okay.
I think a lot of it got masked because of, I think the last time that you came on my show, Pat Mayo Experience, by the way, if you want to go check it out. I told you that James Cook would be a league winner this year.
Yeah.
It's looking good.
Yeah.
Through 2 weeks. But he did so much on Thursday night against the Dolphins, and the Dolphins did so little, culminating with the Tua pick six, and then Tua gets out of the game, that we haven't seen the Bills offense do anything. But Khalil Shakir has been one of the most efficient route runners and receivers through 2 weeks, and no one has paid attention to that. He legitimately might be a top 15 wide receiver. We'll call him top 20 just to be on the conservative side. He's the number one in this offense. He's going to get his 6 for 80 every single game as long as the Bills don't jump out to these big leads or play terrible offenses, because their defense is crap. It is awful. Now, a banged up Tua is not going to do anything against them. Most teams are going to keep them throwing the entire time. So that's an offense I could see being far more productive and consistent than, and even Dalton Kincaid would be another one. All these guys that have wildly underperformed, I think you need to put the Bills into some sort of context. They were god-awful for the first half against Arizona. Then they were awesome in the second half.
Yeah.
And they came out like a man on fire to the first 10 minutes against the Dolphins. Then they literally didn't need to do anything the rest of the game. That's not going to happen every week. The Bills offense is going to be very good. It is the best part of their team. They have the second best quarterback in football. Attach yourself to players like that.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is that when we're working in these small samples, 2-game sample size, right? When the Bills are in a game script like that, that means a quarter of their season is in that kind of environment, which is obviously going to skew, a lot of the data and the performances that we're looking at right now, whenever that's the case. The only thing with a Dalton, you also, it's going to be interesting to see, I talked about this in my mailbag episode, what happens with Dalton Kincaid. He has a minus 0.6 ADOT right now. So you got to hope, you gotta hope that as they develop and get better offensively, or at least need to do more offensively, they start to use him down the field a little bit more. To me, it's more so in these small samples, recognize that it's a thing. This is what I talked about with Stephon Diggs week 1. I didn't think that Diggs was going to have a 1.5 ADOT for the rest of the season, but recognize that his role probably going to be a lower ADOT role. It's going to be in an offense where Nico's an alpha. Tank Dell's going to get plenty of looks. There's at least some fear with how Diggs might perform versus maybe your preseason expectation. And if you could profit off his 2 touchdowns, go ahead and try to profit off of it. But I feel similarly about what's going on in Buffalo right now with Dalton Kincaid in particular, mostly Dalton Kincaid, where recognize that they've used him in a little bit of a weird way so far this year. But if that offense and when that offense sees a normal game script, that's when you really need to react. See how Kincaid is being used in that environment as opposed to the small sample size one.
And even to even take a micro sample from that Thursday night game, Kincaid was being used a lot early on in that game. He had his 2 targets right away. He was a part of their offense. And then, again, they just didn't need to play offense anymore. That was kind of the end of it. So he got relegated to standing out there and doing nothing. He's not a cardio king. He's like the anti-cardio king based on that ADOT. But he's the type of player right now that is actually a good buy low. I'm not saying he's going to be good the rest of the season. I don't know this. I have no idea. But if you think about where the preseason stock was for him versus how people value him today, he is not, although he was drafted as a top end tight end, people still were like, they were trying to buy into the hype on Dalton Kincaid. It's not like he was doing it all last year. We saw flashes. People bought in, and now maybe they feel like they got some buyer's remorse. Now, when you have a Jamar Chase, people know that he's good. We don't know that Dalton Kincaid is good. We think that he's good, but you might be having, like I said, buyer's remorse right now, and that is actually someone that you might be able to get for like 60 cents on the dollar.
This episode is sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. Even though your season-long drafts are over, you can still draft teams over on Underdog. Just head to underdogfantasy.com or download the app and check out their NFL drafts. You can draft a team for a ton of different slates, all in snake draft form. And if you haven't checked out Underdog yet, now's a great time to do it. Because if you sign up with promo code LATEROUND, you'll not only get a first-time deposit offer, but you'll also get my rest of season rankings. After signing up, you'll get an email to your inbox with a link with those rest of season rankings. They're updated each week. So again, that's underdogfantasy.com, promo code LATEROUND. Underdog is the best and easiest place to play fantasy sports. Now back to the show. Let's look at the Carolina Panthers. Andy Dalton is now stepping in for Bryce Young. Does this matter for fantasy football in your opinion? Like would you be buying into Deontay Johnson, or are you saying, now look, Andy Dalton stepping in, it's still Andy Dalton. I don't want to necessarily, put a lot of stock into this Panthers offense. I'll just see how it kind of goes here in week 3.
I think Deontay Johnson's wildly playable. I have him ranked in half PPR at wide receiver number 38 this week. I have Thielen at number 41. I think they're fine options as a flex or a really low end wide receiver 3. I just think about Dalton, and listen, I could be completely wrong, but he was slinging it last year in Seattle when he got a start. They lost because they're gonna lose a ton because they're not good. But the big difference between Dalton right now and Bryce Young is he can actually complete passes down the field. Like Deontay Johnson's still getting his separation. Yeah. And I just think that crisp route runners at this point of Andy Dalton's career are going to be the huge beneficiaries right now. Like, is Leggett going to be that guy? Probably not. At least in the onset with Andy Dalton. But Thielen and Deontay Johnson in particular, they run crisp routes, they create separation, and they're where they're supposed to be. Yeah. And that's good enough for Andy Dalton to make these completions. So where they were completely unplayable and inept, I think that maybe one of them can catch a touchdown this week. Wouldn't that be crazy?
So we're talking about market sentiment and such. Do you think that market sentiment would say trade for Deontay Johnson right now because people are so down on the Panthers offense, or do you think that the average fantasy manager understands that there's a likely upgrade coming at quarterback?
See, I don't know. I don't know how people view Andy Dalton. Yeah. And I mean, listen, I'm not playing in the bulk of leagues that you're playing in. I'm just mainly playing when it's strict season-long fantasy football. Sure. I've had like the leagues that I played on forever. I used to anonymously manage a team on Yahoo every single year, a 10-team league under a different account, and just draft like kickers every single time. And I would try to recreate my team off the waiver wire to see how I can do throughout the course of the season. So maybe I should go back to that exercise again, because I really did feel like in order to get good players, you have to make these trades. Yeah. The problem was it was hard to find a league that you would actually do it. Then you'd have to play in like 4 of them in order to find one of these leagues to expand everything. And it became a hassle. You know how it is.
That's a fun experiment, though.
It is. I mean, it was a lot of fun. I won a few leagues doing it that way. Like you could build a team from nothing every single year and use like the sell high, buy low method to really build out a very good roster. And it keeps you thinking ahead. Like, I would have 3 defenses for the next 3 weeks kind of thing, because I had to maximize my point with any edge I could get. With streamers, you have 3 quarterbacks on your team, and then you just try to find enough of these like hot pickup guys where you can get a 2-for-1 and actually get a real running back that you can play every week. So then your bench isn't as important. It's all about your starters every single time. But I don't know if Deontay Johnson's actually going to be someone that they're probably excited that it's not Bryce Young, that maybe you can get a chance. It would be Adam Thielen, who you could probably just pick up if you wanted to, because he might just be the guy and Deontay Johnson's not. Like, we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a lot of Deontay Johnson, unfortunately, and I am holding tight. I am cautiously optimistic that things can turn around for this Panthers offense. Speaking of turning things around, Travis Kelce, and to a lesser extent, Patrick Mahomes, to some degree, Patrick Mahomes. Are you concerned at all about them in fantasy football after the first 2 weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. Not so much Mahomes, but Kelce in particular.
Yeah.
It almost just feels like he's conditioning, and it's going to be that way for 8 weeks. And when they get to late November, December, when they're gearing up to win the Super Bowl, he's going to be fine all of a sudden. He's an old man. He's a huge body. He's an old man. And we forget how injured he was at the beginning of last year, that he's going to have these spike games and everything is going to appear to be fine. He'll remind you that he's Travis Kelce. But this week-to-week consistency, it doesn't seem... Honestly, if you were redrafting right now, who would be your tight end? What? Would it be Brock Bowers?
Probably Trey McBride. I think my rest of season rankings, I have McBride 1 and Bowers 2.
Those seem to be like the only two guys that do any, like, that you can even have a modicum of consistency with.
Yeah.
Right now.
Right now,
everyone
for
else
sure.
is just kind of like, ugh.
Right now, I do think there's going to be, just based on what we've seen, I actually had a thread about this, talked about it in my mailbag, but based on what we've seen over the last 10 years or so, we generally see some regression with the tight end position. They like last year, they also got off slow, the tight ends. They started pretty slow and then things regressed. They got better target shares. They saw a higher percentage of overall receiving production in fantasy from week 3 onward. The difference with last year to this year that you would be hoping for is last year, it was not the top tight ends that were necessarily doing that from an ADP perspective. It was the Sam Laportas, the Trey McBrides, the guys coming from nowhere, not totally nowhere. I mean, plenty of people, including myself, were hyping them up, but there's not really, doesn't seem like that's happening at quite the same rate this year, which is why I think the tight end position, like we still have a chance for the elite guys to separate themselves, if that makes sense, right?
It does. How much of this do you think plays into, with all these teams playing 2 high safeties, passing being down in general, that tight ends are simply being asked to block more than run routes?
So far, tight end target share, just straight target share, has been pretty in line, just a little bit below average based on what we've seen the last decade through 2 weeks, right? I think that what we're seeing is there's definitely some touchdown variance. Only about 12% of receiving touchdowns have gone to tight ends when that number has been over 20% usually through the first 2 weeks. So we're seeing that's going to regress. We only have 8 tight end touchdowns through 2 weeks. Now we might see one Thursday night. We're recording this before the Thursday night game. Maybe Tyler Conklin or Hunter Henry find the end zone, but there's only been 8 tight end touchdowns so far, through the first 2 games, through the first 2 weeks. So there's going to be some regression there. I think that what might be happening, if I were to just kind of do this off, because I've been thinking about this a lot since recording and prepping for my mailbag episode. I think some of it could be that offenses are performing just in general really, really poorly, right? And when offenses perform poorly, quarterbacks likely are not getting to their second and third reads as quickly as much. And so when that's the case, tight ends are not going to see necessarily, they're seeing the volume, but maybe the efficient, I don't know, because the volume is still there, right? Like the volume from strictly a target share perspective, it's that part of it has not been that different. Maybe it's the too high stuff. I would think that would affect wide receiver more than tight end. But maybe it's that from an efficiency standpoint for the tight ends, they're not able to break off bigger plays and do bigger things there. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of the other thing that I've thrown around is that we're seeing teams not prepare as well in the offseason because of different time constraints / they're not using their players as much in the preseason. Tight end's a really complicated position, right? Like it's one where you have to understand blocking assignments and receiving assignments. And that's why we see a tougher transition into the NFL for a lot of these guys. And so there could be a little bit of that at play as well, where they're just not fully up to speed yet with what's going on within these offenses. And maybe once week 4, week 5 come around, they're going to feel a little bit more comfortable.
Well, the target share remains the same and touchdowns are down. I would be curious, and I haven't dug into it, and I don't know if you have either. Maybe I will after the show, a first read percentage on tight ends, comparing that
I'd be
to
curious
this year.
Yeah.
From last year, if that's down, because it could be something as simple as they need to buy a little bit more time to let these routes develop for the receivers, that they're still running the same amount of routes and maybe getting the same amount of targets. However, you might see a situation where they're asked to like chip off the line,
Right.
which delays their route. So they're not getting to the seam as quickly as they would have last year, hence why the yardage is way down and those touchdowns are way down as well. I mean, that's a hypothesis. I can dig into the data to go see if that's going to end up being the case, but I mean, that's possible.
Yeah, of course. And then, it could be an average up the target thing as well, right? Where these guys maybe, I haven't dug into things at that level, but it could be that, the guys are just seeing targets closer to the line of scrimmage and not down the field as much, which plays into the too high thing. I think there's a lot of other stuff. Like right now I'm introducing the data to folks. I want people to come up with explanations and reasons. I don't have the reason right now because I think there's probably a lot that we just don't know yet. And there's also probably a lot of noise because it's only been 2 weeks, right? But factually, target share has been the same. Touchdowns have been a lot lower. We do at least see regression with touchdowns. We've seen this over the last 10 years too with tight ends, where the years where they had high touchdown shares, it regressed. The years where they had low touchdown shares after 2 weeks, it went the other way, it regressed favorably. So I do think that at least that's in store. And the fact that we don't have any late round bloomers yet, maybe you could throw Brock Bowers and say, but Brock Bowers was still like a fringe top 10 tight end. That also still plays into the idea that these elite tight ends might still be able to give you, some sort of advantage week in and week out. But it's definitely, to me, it's going to be one of the bigger storylines in fantasy football for the rest of the season, especially, from a best ball perspective. I'm becoming a best ball bro. I talked to a lot of best ball pros who play literally like thousands of line and make thousands of lineups and draft thousands of lineups. And the overall sentiment, including from myself, was that going elite tight end was generally the best way to approach things. Now, some of that had to do with the fact that the alternatives, the opportunity cost in the range where those tight ends were going wasn't that significant, but some guys will pop up. I mean, some of those guys who were drafted in the 4th to 6th round at wide receiver and running back will be totally fine. They already have been totally fine. So I think that's going to end up swinging a lot in best ball as well this year.
I love that we both went to underdog and you got really into best ball and I just didn't. I don't think I drafted a single best ball lineup.
Yeah, that's why underdog's the best, because they understand what we're doing for our markets. That's right.
Yeah. I'm just all in on pick'em every day. Yeah. I love it so much.
It's very good. It's very, very good. All right, let's talk about the Kansas City Chiefs backfield, Pat, where Isaiah Pacheco now, I mean, the reports yesterday was like, oh yeah, he might not be able to play this season. Whereas at one point it was like, oh, maybe he'll be out like 6 to 8 weeks and you can keep him on your bench and hopefully he comes back and he's, an RB1 when he returns. I don't know the timetable right now, but what we do know is that in the short term to medium term to maybe even long term, we're going to see a backfield that's Samaje Perine, Carson Steele, Kareem Hunt, maybe Keontae Ingram gets thrown in there a little bit as well. What's your read on this backfield? Is there going to be a running back in fantasy that really emerges?
Maybe, but I couldn't tell you which one it's going to be.
Yeah.
I guess the lead right now would be Carson Steele, just based on what we've seen so far. And if people watch him in college, they love him. I mean, let me ask you this, JJ. How many guys that were bad in college play in the NFL?
Not many of them.
So you can probably look back at most of these guys and they were really good in college. I think that Perine is probably the best of the bunch, but you also have to remember that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is eligible to come back in week 5 as well.
Yeah.
Now with the signing of Keontae Ingram and Hunt, that probably leads me to believe that he is not going to be ready to come back in week 5, but he's just another name that you can throw into the mix. Perine has been used a little bit here and there so far this season. It's probably due to him not having a full concept of pass protection in the playbook, because that's why he would be on the field, is to pass protect, catch passes, whereas Steele doesn't really do that. He just kind of handles short yardage. They'll give him a few carries along the way. I don't think you should really go all in on any of these guys. I could see it being a 3-4 headed committee with, like, we even saw that in the past. Like, it was so hard to play Pacheco and treat him as an elite option when Jarek was there. And Jarek didn't even really do anything. He just took away enough to kind of make them both not as valuable as you would ever want. And now there's like 3 guys who are like not as good as those 2 guys, yet everyone's rushing out to spend all their fab bucks. It didn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I was not aggressive with the Chiefs backfield. I mean, I had Samaje Perine in some deep leagues already, so that was good because I got someone who got a nice upgrade in value and such. But I mean, like, I think bottom line is what we're going to see probably. I think if we were to project this, I'd say we'll see a 65-35 split on early downs in favor of Carson Steele. He'll probably see the goal line work, which, by the way, the goal line work in Kansas City is not as attractive as people think just because they like to throw the ball so much. when they're close to the end zone. And then P. Ryan as the receiving back. So you could easily make the argument that P. Ryan's more valuable because, number one, there's the upside that he could just see more early down work than what we're projecting. But I think he's kind of locked into the receiving role. Like, would you agree that he's going to be the guy who is going to at least be on those long down and distance snaps and more than likely running more routes than Carson Steele at the end of the day?
I do, but I could see in 2 weeks' time that's all Kareem Hunt.
Right. Yeah. Things can change. Things can 100% change. Yeah.
I would equate this backfield to a lot like how the old Ravens backfields used to look when they just had 3 dudes and it didn't matter who was on the team. You could have Le'Veon Bell on the team, and some weeks he would have 13 carries, then none.
Yeah.
The next week. I anticipate it's going to go like that. Think about it in this term. Drinking Coca-Cola, not the best for you. And people will say drinking Diet Coke is healthy. But it's not healthy for you to drink Diet Coke. You should probably just drink water and just leave the other 2 aside. That's what I would be doing with this backfield.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I saw a lot of like 50% FOB bids on Carson Steele this week. And I just, look, it might work out. We're obviously just forecasting. We're trying to predict, but that from a process standpoint is something that I could not really get behind.
It might be worth it because of the way that a lot of these backfields break down now that they're inherently a split anyway, that there's so few bell cow backs that it's not like it was 5 years ago where, oh, geez, that guy went down. Well, his backup's going to get 80% of the carries, spend all your fab on them. That situation might not arise throughout the course of the entire season anymore. Like Jordan Mason was that guy in week 1. If he wasn't drafted in your league, which he probably should have been drafted in your league.
Right.
Like, did you play in any league where someone didn't own Jordan Mason?
There was one. It was in my home league. He was still out there before the season started, but it was, we also drafted in mid-August and we didn't touch free agency until right before the season started. So
that's fair. Like the moment that this calf news came up with McCaffrey, I didn't think he was going to miss time and be out 6 weeks.
Right.
But be like, if anything happened to McCaffrey, I'd want the guy behind him.
He should at least, at the very least, be rostered. Yes. But here's my, like, let me ask you this. With Carson Steele, who would you rather have on your roster right now? Ty Chandler or Carson Steele?
Ty Chandler.
Yeah. Because you're getting, that's what I'm saying. You're getting that kind of production. Like Ty Chandler with Aaron Jones might see similar fantasy points in PPR formats as Carson Steele will right now in this environment, right? But then there's the upside. If Aaron Jones goes down, we know that Ty Chandler then could be an 80% backfield guy, right? I mean, we saw at the end of last year, Ty Chandler playing that role. So I think that there's enough of like those players, Bucky Irving to some degree, even though I don't think he would take on like a massive workload.
See, I think that Bucky Irving is a better like guy to have on your team than any of those guys.
Sure. No, I don't even because I think he's going to dig into. I had him as an ad the last 2 weeks, but like I don't know if Irving size wise, all of that is going to like be a true bell cow. But I think that he would be a bigger bell cow than what we're going to see from Carson Steele. Is my point, right? Where I don't think Steele is going to see enough receiving work to warrant all that. Like that's the fear of it. But look, I mean, end of the day, I say this all the time. Running back comes down to a coaching decision. If the coaches want these guys to be bell cows or to not be bell cows, if the Jets walk out next week and they say, we want a 50-50 split with Breece Hall and Braylon Allen, then that's that we got to react to that, right? I'm saying this strictly from the perspective of this is not the kind of prospect and player, even though he's an incredibly fun player, Carson Steele. This is not the kind of prospect and player that we typically want to go all in with. Right. Like it's just not the kind of player that usually wins fantasy titles. Okay.
I would tend to agree.
It
would be great if you already had him on your team. Then maybe roll the dice on some upside. Now that you're actively paying for him, that becomes a problem.
Yeah. All right. I want to go through some other running backs right now who have started off slow, and I want to get your reaction to see if there's any hope for these guys. Okay. I have 5 of them. It doesn't have to be rapid fire either. I know that a lot of shows are like rapid fire. Give me 2 words for this answer. You can give me as many words as you want, Pat. First one is Zamir White. What's your
dust?
There you go. Perfect. Is that are you done with Zamir White right now?
I mean, I wasn't in on Zamir White to begin with.
I wasn't either, but it's fun to talk about.
It's not any good. That's the problem here.
Yeah. Well,
listen, if you signed me up that Zamir White would get 20 touches a game guaranteed for every game this year, yes, I would be interested.
Yeah.
But through 2 weeks, that's not even the case.
Well, Antonio Pierce keeps coming out. Like, he did this all summer, and he's done it basically the first 2 weeks of the season. Comes out every week, and he's like, we want to get Zamir White 20 touches a game. Like, that's what we're trying to. And it's like, you're literally not doing that. Like we're watching the games, and you're using Alexander Madison. You're not, at least last week, Zamir White ran more routes and was a little bit more involved as a receiver. But it's a really, really weird. Like, it's almost as if, because like the Raiders right now are second in the league in passing rate above over expected. Like, they're throwing the ball a lot more than any of us probably projected. And so, him coming out and saying these things about Zamir White, it's just it just contradicts what they're doing on the field entirely. It just doesn't make that much sense. So yeah, I mean, I'm obviously, he's even, like, I was already low on him. He's gone down my rest of season rankings as well, because I don't know how he would be going in the other direction at this point.
Do you know why they're passing over expectation? Because their running backs
suck. Yeah, running backs are terrible. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. How about DeAndre Swift?
There is no faster player in the league to watch who goes absolutely nowhere on the field.
Mm-hmm.
It's incredible. He gets to the outside. Darrell Henderson used to be exactly the same way. He'd have all this speed and hit the edge. You'd be like, oh man, this guy's going to be gone. He's immediately tackled for a loss of one. Like, how did that happen? He looks so fast. Play DeAndre Swift this week. Everyone has run all over Indianapolis so far this season. Mixon put up, 500 yards against him in week one.
Yeah.
Josh Jacobs did the same thing. They're committed currently to running DeAndre Swift. And if they can effectively run with DeAndre Swift, then Caleb Williams doesn't have to pass so much to the other team. And maybe they can actually win a game without blocking punts and defensive touchdowns the entire time. So the move would be with DeAndre Swift. He has not been very good this year. He has not really been ever that good in the course of his career. And he was running behind the best offensive line in football a year ago before Jason Kelce ended up retiring in the offseason. So I think that he can go bananas this week. You could be looking at like 18 carries, 120 yards, touchdown, as long as Khalil Herbert doesn't steal it from him at the goal line, or Caleb Williams rushes one in, or God forbid they actually give the ball to Roschon Johnson, who we all enjoyed last year. He's just not very good. But he's in an opportunistic spot this week based on his volume, his projection, and the opponent that he's going against, that if you do have him, trade him immediately when he goes off this week for whatever. Like, if J.K. Dobbins has a bad game against Pittsburgh, which he probably should, and then DeAndre Swift has a really good game against the Colts, just make that swap. And the J.K. Dobbins owner in your league will be happy to give you J.K. Dobbins for this. Oh, I told you DeAndre Swift was good. Now, he had one good matchup. He's not good.
One thing that I have tossed around in my head, and actually in some of my leagues, is adding Khalil Herbert this week too, just because we've seen him be, they don't use him enough as a receiver. He's got pass pro issues, all that kind of stuff. But we've seen him be one of the most efficient running backs in football since he entered the league. And we're already seeing DeAndre Swift ranks bottom 5 in basically every rushing metric so far this year, right? Every efficiency metric. And so what if there is a scenario where Swift comes out this week, doesn't perform very well in a soft matchup, and maybe Khalil Herbert busts one or has a decent enough game, and we start to see kind of a switch happen? Do you think that's possible, or do you think it's a wasted roster spot at this point?
I mean, it's probably a wasted roster spot, because I don't ever envision a situation where Herbert just becomes the guy in that backfield. I mean, Swift's the guy already, and he's no good. So even if, like, let's say the efficiency is better for Khalil Herbert, how much better is it really going to be?
Yeah, I mean, it's fair. Like to me, Herbert is not a 10-team, even probably like normal-ish 12-team guy that you absolutely want to have on your bench. In deeper formats, though, I can see him at least being rosterable, because of you're playing against DeAndre Swift just being an inefficient back.
True, but I'd still rather, because you're never going to play Khalil Herbert if DeAndre Swift is active, because it's doubtful that he just steals the job and all of a sudden he gets 70% of the carries. Sure. Even if Swift got hurt, I don't know if Herbert would get 70% of the carries. So I would still rather have like Ray Davis on my team.
Yeah,
because I know I'm not going to play him anyway.
Yeah.
That the only time I would ever play Ray Davis, he would probably be a top 10 running back.
That's fair. That's fair. Next guy, Chase Brown.
Unless he can learn how to pass protect, he's just not going to be on the field.
Yeah, that's been the problem. And look, I will say there was a quote. I can't remember if it was OC related or not. There was a quote out of Cincinnati from the coaching staff this week saying that this is a small sample size that we're working with in terms of the split that we've seen thus far, and that they do want it to be more evenly distributed. Now, that's obviously something, again, we've seen that with like the Raiders, like I just said, with Antonio Pierce and them wanting to get Zamir White more involved, when there's a tangible thing that was a concern entering this year, right? Like that was the big concern with Chase Brown was, are they going to trust him in pass protection? And it seems like thus far, they're not trusting him in that role. With that being said, I feel way more confident about holding Chase Brown than picking up a guy like Khalil Herbert, like I said, in like a deeper format. Because with Brown, I can still see a scenario where, number one, he does get more work because Zach Moss has not been very efficient so far on the ground and like overly effective on the ground thus far. He's reliable enough, but he's not been this like super special back. Whereas Brown hypothetically has a skill set to carry a decent workload, to get work through the air, as long as that pass pro stuff turns around. Would you agree with that assessment?
I would. Of all the names that you've listed and have on your list that we're talking about, he's a hold. He's an actual buy low.
Yeah.
Because he's not someone you're going to play. If you trade for him, he is a project to stash on your bench. But you can create the path to upside for him where he is a top 20 fantasy contributor this year.
Right.
It might not happen. It might not happen till week 10 or whenever he gets this figured out. But Zach Moss isn't the answer. Like you said, he's a steady hand who's not going to make mistakes, or at least he's going to make mistakes, but he's not overtly going to make mistakes. They can trust him next to Joe Burrow. The moment they can trust Chase Brown to stand next to Joe Burrow, Chase Brown's going to be on the field.
Yeah. Yeah. What about Rico Dowdle?
Nah, Dallas can't run, man.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't been any better than Zeke so far this year. Like realistically, you look at his per rush stuff. I mean, maybe it'll change, especially, as the season goes on and Zeke being the age that he's at right now. But I just, I agree. I think it's just kind of like a brush it aside. You can probably have him on your bench if you want to, because I think if there is an injury, you might see an uptick in volume. But even still, it's like, I don't know what it's really going to look like at the end of the day.
I mean, he's like crappy Tony Pollard from last year somehow. And Tony Pollard was bad.
Yeah. Last one at the running back position. What about Blake Corum?
I never understood this to begin with anyway. They have a guy that they give the ball to every single time. And people are like, no, they're not going to give that guy the ball anymore. They're going to give this guy that we know nothing about because he goes in the last round of fantasy drafts. This was a big, people want it to happen to make themselves look smart rather than actually smartly looking at a situation to see what's happening. Even if Kyron goes down, it's going to be a split between Corum and Ronnie Rivers, it looks like anyway. And does anyone want to really touch any piece of this offense? Forget about Kupp and Nakua being out. When are their offensive linemen coming back?
Yeah, the thing, that's the problem, I think, with the entire offense right now. Like, Kyron Williams has not been good per touch so far this year. I'm not saying he's bad. I'm just saying this environment sucks right now. Like, their offensive line totally beat up. Cooper Kupp, we have no idea how long he's going to be out. Puka Nakua probably till like mid-season. It's going to be rough out there, I think, for the offense over the next month or so. That's obviously going to hurt Kyron's efficiency. But when you don't have a system where you can throw a running back there to be efficient in, and that guy's likely not going to see a ton of volume because you have Kyron Williams in front of him. Yeah, he's a handcuff, but like you said, I do wonder at this point if they would how much they would end up using Ronnie Rivers if an injury were to occur.
Probably half the time. So in a low upside offense, like that's not the sort of handcuff I would want. Like even if I get it wrong with who is the handcuff or the role that I project them for, should a starter get hurt, I would at least want to attach myself to higher upside offenses.
Yeah. All right, let's do the exact same thing, but at wide receiver. Let's start with Garrett Wilson, who's kind of gotten off to a pretty iffy start so far.
I think he's going to be fine. The volume is going to be there. Rodgers is going to get more settled. Obviously, you're going to be hearing this after Thursday Night Football. I do have concerns again of every wide receiver one against the Patriots. I understand that Metcalf was able to break a big one, but he was not lined up against Christian Gonzalez on that play. I think you can almost thrust Christian Gonzalez into, if he is covering you, you're not going to do anything because DK didn't do anything. Against Gonzalez. And every time that Gonzalez was on Metcalf, why do you think JSN had such a big game last week? The moment that he got off of Metcalf and switched the other side of the field, or they moved DK in motion, it's a 90-yard touchdown for DK. So you can still pass on the Patriots. You just can't pass at a particular guy. He absolutely annihilated Jamar Chase week 1, too. So that might happen again on Thursday Night Football, unless he's like, man, you know who we really need to shut down is Allen Lazard.
Allen Lazard, baby. Yeah. People are going to be listening to this. I mean, and after Allen Lazard goes off for a 7-catch, 95-yard, 3-touchdown performance tonight. But yeah, so we're recording this before Thursday Night Football. We'll see what happens with Garrett Wilson. I agree. Even if Wilson has a bad week 3, I still am not going to be overly panicked. Let's go to one guy who I think a lot of people are worried. Like I have general concerns for sure. Amari Cooper, who's seen a lot of volume, but he has done absolutely nothing with that volume.
Yeah, I didn't like him. I just, once it was clear that it was Deshaun Watson and not Jameis Winston or whoever it might be throwing passes in Cleveland, I was just out immediately. And maybe that changes once their offensive line gets healthy, but it probably won't. He's going to be a fringe wide receiver 3 at best, unless they make a quarterback change.
Yeah, the quarterback thing is definitely big. The one thing that I will say is that the Browns have been fairly pass heavy in neutral environments, over expected so far this year. And that's with the OC change, because they get Ken Dorsey, who's been historically a pretty pass heavy coordinator. But I read off a stat on the mailbag episode where I was looking at targets or players who have gotten targets that are 10 plus yards, air yards down the field. And Amari Cooper's seen 7 of them and he's caught 0 of them to start the season, which is not what you look for. Very, very tough quarterback situation going on with Amari Cooper. Next one, though, is Tank Dell. Are you more optimistic or pessimistic with Dell?
I'm optimistic, but from a wide receiver 3 perspective, there's too many options there. And he's going to have his big games. It's all about the downside games that we get from Tank Dell. Can he establish a baseline where, his bad game is going to be 5 for 60 or something like that? If that's the case, then he's going to be great. But if we just see more and more circumstances where it's like 2 for 18 because he's the forgotten man that week, then I got some real problems. Then he is I always enjoy a good same game parlay where you take guys over yardage but under receptions because you anti-correlate it together and it gives you big payouts. You throw in an anytime touchdown, you're looking at like 200 to 1 with these sorts of things. But he ends up becoming like that, like fancy Jalen Hyatt, which you really don't want to be.
Yeah, my thing with him is that, like, if you look across the league, offenses are so bad right now. This is at least an offense we can feel good about. This is one of the very few that we feel decent about, and his route participation has been the same as Diggs and Nico so far this year. I personally think he's kind of a buy candidate. But like you said, I'm not expecting him to have like a wide receiver 1 season or anything like that. I think Nico is the clear alpha in that offense.
Additionally, if you take a look back at the Sunday night game, if he just makes that catch when Watson hits it, I just don't think he thought that Watson was going to be able to deliver the ball where he delivered it to. But if he catches that might be an 80-yard touchdown.
Yeah, and we're looking at this completely differently. Like no one's thinking about Tank Dell this way. How about DJ Moore, who has been the number 1 for Chicago, but that's not saying much because Caleb Williams has not been a number 1, if you will.
I'm concerned that he's going to match anywhere where he was drafted. Yeah. Wait, is he even playable in week 3?
I think that he probably is. Matchup is better. I at least feel a little bit better matchup wise about Chicago's passing attack. But yeah, this is the growing pains. These are the growing pains that you get with pass catchers associated with rookie quarterbacks. This is something I've wrote about and talked about for years. And we're seeing it to some degree with like a Terry McLaurin. We're seeing it with DJ Moore, whose peripherals are fine. Like his target shares have been fine. His route participation's been fine. But I also wonder what things will look like too when Keenan Allen's back. So there's a lot up in the air, I think, right now with Moore.
I'm looking at my rankings. I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, just like you are. I have him at wide receiver number 23 for the week before Thursday Night Football, but that leaves some names behind him. Like I don't, you know what? Because sometimes, you do rankings every single week. You do projections every single week. What you do on your actual team doesn't necessarily mimic that every single time because you get like Sunday morning, you're like, you know what? I'm going to play this guy instead.
Yeah, sure.
Everyone does it.
Sure.
It's not a secret. It happens. But like I have JSN after him, Waddle with Skylar Thompson after him, Lockett after him, Diggs after him, Kelvin Ridley, Jameson Williams, Tank Dell. I could see playing all those guys over him, honestly.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I would push him down to like receiver 31 all of a sudden. And then he's like, is it DJ Moore or Andre Yoshevas if T. Higgins misses the game again?
Yeah, I think that look, I kind of valued Moore as more of like a high 3-ish, maybe low 2. And folks were like in that, like at one point in the offseason, he was like wide receiver 15 or something like that. So I'm not like shocked at what's going on thus far. I do think though that naturally with I haven't studied in particular the pass catchers on teams with rookie quarterbacks and how they perform in the second half of the year versus the first. I've looked at like rookie wide receivers and rookie running backs, and a lot of them tend to perform a lot better the second half of the season. But it wouldn't shock me if that same kind of trend happens with rookie quarterbacks and the pass catchers on those teams, if they end up just performing better as the season goes on, because these guys are getting more and more reps. So I think the hope with him obviously is you just got to hope that Caleb Williams turns things around, that Shane Waldron's offense gets a little bit better than it currently looks. The last guy I want to get to this in this wide receiver group is Michael Pittman. And on top of that, I want to ask you about Alec Pierce, because Alec Pierce has gotten off to a hot start, but I still haven't ranked him very high in my rest of season rankings, and my patrons and folks in my Discord have been yelling at me about this. But where are you at with this Colt wide receiving group? Are you worried about Pittman, and have you been gobbling up Alec Pierce?
So this week I have Pittman at 34 and I have Pierce at 44. If you wanted to swap those two guys, I would understand. What percentage of a chance would you give Alec Pierce of outscoring, even with the lead that he has? Let's set them back at 0 from this point on, week 3 on. What are the chances Alec Pierce outscores Michael Pittman in fantasy?
If they're totally healthy, look, this is going to sound crazy based on what's happened weeks 1 and 2. I think it's maybe like a 10% chance.
No, I completely disagree. And I might be wrong on that because Downs is coming back this week.
Right,
I want to see how they insert Downs into this offense. Because honest to God, Michael Pittman is just running Josh Downs routes right now. Like, those are the only passes that he can catch. Anthony Richardson is going to be so bad from a game-to-game basis. Like, to really amazing throws to horrible throws. And one of the reasons that Pittman was able to excel so much last year is Gardner Minshew is an incredibly accurate
100, I agree with, yes, I agree with
and like almost the same case that I made earlier with Deontay Johnson, Adam Thielen with Andy Dalton. Pittman would stand to benefit from someone like that throwing in the ball. Whereas Anthony Richardson, Pierce is their deep guy.
Sure.
A.D. Mitchell gets himself open, but Pierce is the guy that actually comes down with the ball. Downs isn't that guy. He's going to run drag routes. He's going to run close to the line of scrimmage. Pierce is running go routes. And when you have a guy who can throw the ball 90 yards in the air, he's like less fancy Shaheed.
Yeah. So this is why I feel the way. Like, I do think that because the passing offense probably won't score a ton of points, versus like a normal pocket passing offense or an offense with a quarterback who's a little bit more accurate. Because of that, there's going to be probably a little bit more variance. So maybe I should have added a little bit more variance to that 10% number. But my fear with Pierce and why I think Pittman has a way better chance to simply outscore is just deployment of these wide receivers. Because Michael Pittman's going to be on the field running the most routes on that team no matter what. Like he's going to be their X. He'll be on the field. Josh Downs comes in. He's probably going to be their primary slot guy, which means the final spot to play on the outside and it's in their 11 personnel will be Alec Pierce, sure, but they might rotate A.D. Mitchell in there as well, which means just fewer routes run for a guy like Pierce. That's my fear, is that I think Downs and Pittman, from a player standpoint, a talent perspective, are much superior to Alec Pierce. And I say that not just because I didn't really love Pierce as a prospect coming out, but we haven't seen it from him this is his 3rd year in the NFL. Like it's been 2 games where he's been doing this thing. I agree with like style and stylistically, he probably fits an Anthony Richardson better than a Michael Pittman does. This is why last year, and I wish I would have done it more heavily this year, I faded Michael Pittman. It was a huge mistake last year or I wasn't as high on Michael Pittman. It's a huge mistake last year, but then Anthony Richardson got hurt, or because Anthony Richardson got hurt, right? This year, we're kind of seeing that come to fruition a little bit, and that's definitely the fear. But I do have worry about Alec Pierce as well, because A.D. Mitchell, especially if they want to get the guy more reps, is going to, like, Alec Pierce is the replacement more than the other 2 guys.
I think that Pierce at least initially splits with Downs, because even last week we saw that Pierce played more snaps than Pittman and ran more routes than Pittman. That was a big eye-opener for me. And I get that Downs wasn't there, and that might completely change going into it. I guess between the two, the way I would look at it is it almost takes Michael Pittman's 6 catches to equal 1 Pierce catch in terms of fantasy points.
You could, yeah, because look, Michael Pittman's been used like this basically throughout his career, and it's I don't want to say it's frustrating because this is probably the way that he should be deployed. The problem is that it's very difficult, to your point, to get a player like Michael Pittman a lot of fantasy points in an offense that is run the way that this offense is run.
You know what team Pittman should actually play on? The Bills.
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
He would be a perfect Diggs replacement for Josh Allen. Just, why don't you go run an 11-yard in? Let's go do that.
Sure.
I'll hit you.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I think that the overall sentiment is that this passing offense is not one that I want to be overly invested in right now.
Correct. So, and it was a lot like with me and Shaheed last year, and why I have so much Shaheed this year. Because I mean, I didn't project the Saints offense to be this good.
Sure.
I thought they'd look more like they were last year. But last year, it's like, well, Shaheed might get me 0 points, but he might get me 30 points throughout the course of the week. Because if he comes down with any of these shots that they take, it's just a bonanza of fantasy points. That's how I would look at Pierce right now. Like, don't get mad when he gets you 1 point. Just be happy when he gets you 25.
Maybe I'll say 13%. 13% chance.
I think it's like 60-40.
Do you really? Do you really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I do.
That's
because I don't think Pittman's that good in this offense. So Pierce doesn't even have to do a lot.
Yeah. All right. Let's look at the waiver wire really quick. Just a couple more questions for you. Do you have any sneaker? I got
sneakers. I got lots of pairs.
Sneaky deeper plays who might be on waiver wires right now who should be rostered in most formats?
I think Noah Brown should be rostered.
Oh, that's a fun one. That's a fun one.
I liked him the moment that Washington signed him. I was like, oh, this is the perfect guy for Jaden Daniels. So I loaded up, I played some stacks in week 1. It's like, oh, Jaden Daniels, McLaurin, and Noah Brown. Then we get to inactives and he's inactive. Yeah. So I have to replace him with Diami Brown. And then even last week, Diami Brown gets the start over Noah Brown. Noah Brown is active in that game and splits time. So every time that Diami's not on the field, Noah ends up coming in. But guess what? Even with his 30% route participation, who is the receiver who looks the best with Jaden Daniels? Of course, it's Noah Brown. He has a big body. He can do things after the catch. He can stiff arm someone out of the way. He's going to go up and get a ball. He is exactly like with McLaurin. Like McLaurin's like one big catch away from actually having a good season. Yeah, and he missed it by like a half yard in week 1. Yeah. So like, I'm not concerned about McLaurin long term. It might take a few more weeks to get on the same page. He'll be fine. The rest of these goobers on Washington are terrible. Noah Brown is actually good. And when we see Jaden Daniels take off all the time, or he's trying to throw it behind the line of scrimmage to Brian Robinson or Zacchaeus or something. Like Noah Brown is so much better than these guys. And it only takes him a stiff arm and a step to get down the field, that he is the actual yak guy that I think meshes perfectly. So if you're going to take some upside on someone, I'm not saying go out and start Noah Brown this week. Don't read that much into it. What I'm saying is get him on your team now, because once he starts working his way more into this offense and becomes the starter, which he will, you're going to want to have him at that point. Like he's going to be live in some of these games when Washington's playing from behind, and with their defense should be every game unless they're playing the Giants, where he's just going to have like 7 catches on 11 targets. And you give Noah Brown 7 catches on 11 targets, sometimes that's going to be for 180 yards.
Yeah, no, I love that call. I mean, he's coming off a good year, in Houston, and Diami Brown is not it, man. Like it's wild to me that he even is a starter or quote unquote starter right now in the league. So I like that call a lot. Are there any obvious players that you think should be traded away right now?
No, because it's all, again, it's such a cop-out answer, but it's really dependent on value. Like there's some guys that that aren't going to be as good as they are, but you're stuck with them because everyone else knows it too. So you just have to ride it out. Who is the dude, the Eagles receiver, Fulgham? Remember him?
Oh yeah, Travis Fulgham, maybe.
Yeah, like no one wanted him. Like this guy's terrible, but he puts up 30 fantasy points every week. It'd be like if you had Billy Volek and Drew Bennett back in the day. It's like no one's going to give you anything for these guys. Yeah, but you got to keep playing them. You just ride it out and hope it works.
Sure. All right. Before I let you go, I got one more question for you. Give me a bold take for week 3.
DeAndre Swift scores 25 fantasy points.
So you're going down the switcher. I love that you fully recognize that DeAndre Swift has not been good and that he might not be good, but then you're just like, I mean, not to say this is the wrong take. I just love that this is the way that the fantasy brain works, is that you're like, this matchup is great. He's seeing the volume. He's going to score fantasy points.
I also think Houston waxes Minnesota.
Okay. I could see that. I could definitely see that happening. Yeah,
they're a 1.5 favorite.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and the line's moving towards Minnesota. I love Sam Darnold as much as the next guy. Justin Jefferson's not 100%. I hate to remind people that.
Yeah. It sounds like Jordan Addison. I mean, I don't know yet confirmed or not, but a lot of Twitter docs are not optimistic about him playing either. So, but yeah,
did you ever think about going to get because there used to be a guy that I worked with, and I thought he was a doctor, but it turned out that he had a PhD in history, but he was passing himself off as a fantasy medical doctor and giving medical advice on people. And then I was like, You can do that. We should just go get our PhDs and become fantasy doctors. It's the lowest. It's like being a weatherman. It's awesome.
I mean, look, what we're doing is like being a weatherman too. Let's not.
But no one expects us to be right is the big thing. I mean, listen, your audience is a lot different than mine. People expect you to be right. No one expects me to be right.
No, to be fair, there's some really good, like Dr. Edwin Porras on Twitter has been a really, really good resource. And you know, there's Jeff Mueller's out there on Twitter. You know, folks are doing some good stuff that do deserve a shout. I mean, look, I had Edwin on this show on Perspectives last year, and the way that I saw it was people just need to look at the fantasy football Twitter docs the same way they look at analysts, where it's just a guidance thing, right? They're not going to be 100%. It's not going to be a situation where they get everything right, but it's more of a guidance. It's more of a probability thing at the end of the day.
Oh, I 100% agree. If you go to my my X account right now at the PME, I actually set up a fantasy doctor like Twitter list, and it's pure injuries all the time. The one thing that I don't like, and it's listen, who am I credible enough to be giving an opinion on anything in an analysis anyway? And just the same way that anyone starts. I don't like when the fantasy doctors start to give their opinion as analysis as well, because I follow them for the medical stuff.
Yeah.
And I'll project my own onto it. But I understand like the want to do that.
Yes.
But I like it better when it's non-cluttered in that way.
Yeah.
Where it's just medical stuff and I'll, glean what I want from it.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's a fair assessment. Like we're not doing that with injuries. We're not saying like this is how long he's definitely going to be out based on X, Y, and Z, because we don't necessarily know, right? Like that's not.
It's not like I'm getting into huge schematic things. Like, yeah, I used to coach football, but not at like the level of these guys are going at. And like,
right.
What am I going to tell you about guys hitting the A gap this percentage of the time, and that's why they're not running this way? Nothing. I'll let like real football guys break that down. You want to talk fantasy? I got you covered.
That's the thing. Like I tell people all the time, like I'm going to stay in my lane of what I know I am good at doing with this data analysis and with, my experience playing and analyzing fantasy football. When someone asks me a question about an injury, let's say, or something that they're seeing on film that I might not be able to understand, I'm not going to pretend to understand that thing. Why? What? That's not fair to anyone listening to my content or like, I'm not an expert in everything. I'm an expert in, not even expert. That's not the right word to use. Analyst and everything. I'm an analyst in a very particular thing, and I'm going to hopefully provide that kind of value to people.
Hell, I'm an expert in video technology. Other than that, I got really nothing to offer.
You're just an idiot with a camera at the end of the day.
But a good camera.
It's a good camera.
So it makes me look like I know what I'm talking about.
Yes. But with that camera, where can people find that pretty face of yours across the internet?
The vidges you can find at Mayo Media Network right now. You can also download the Pat Mayo Experience audio podcast. It's like JJ's podcast, but way more offensive, way longer, and far less helpful to your fantasy team. But we talk a lot of underdog pick, and we talk a ton of gambling, and we talk a ton of DFS. There are specific fantasy football shows throughout the week. Jake Seeley, go over and do our NFL like real life power rankings while doing our team by team fantasy analysis every single Monday. I do my rankings by myself on Wednesdays, and I do a complete injury and rankings update on Saturday afternoon as well. That all appears on the audio and video feeds. But one thing I am doing, I want to try this out this year. I'm doing fantasy in 5 minutes every single morning, except Wednesdays, because Wednesday's like a dead day in fantasy. I find like you don't have no one's practiced yet. You know what you know already. Waivers have just passed. But Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, on its own audio feed, but the video version is up as well. I try to articulate all the injuries, the spin, the rankings, all in 5 minutes. And you've just heard me talk for like 2.5 minutes anyway. I don't do a great job of narrowing it down, but I'm getting better at it.
Look, no, I think that your stuff is a good companion to what's in the Late Round podcast feed, right? Like this is usually a succinct, just get the information, get out kind of show. Perspectives is more of a laid back, let's just have a conversation about this stuff and talk about Alec Pierce for 15 minutes. But your stuff, is more of the conversational stuff. It's more, like you said, offensive than what you'll find in the Late Round podcast feed. It's good stuff, though. It's always great to chat with you, my man. You can find all my stuff over on lateround.com. Follow me on Twitter at LateRoundQB. Otherwise, everyone, as always, thanks for tuning in.